I am. All right. Okay. Let's see here. Oh, hold on, guys. I lost my screen. Can you still see my screen? Okay. All right. So this session's titled How to Recognize and Tend to Anti-Blackness and Racism. And I want to point out immediately that anti-Blackness is lowercase on purpose. It doesn't get to be a proper noun. It doesn't get to be centered, but it is the topic that we're going to talk about today. I want to welcome everybody here. I am so grateful to be here with you. I'm so grateful to share my ideas and my thinking on this topic. And I'm just grateful for this community in ways that I cannot even express. I know we did land acknowledgements. I also want to acknowledge that it is Black History Month. And I want to highlight a couple of freedom fighters that you may or may not be aware of. Shirley Chisholm was the first US Black Congress member. Nina Simone was a jazz singer and activist who was very prolific and outspoken. Zenzile Miriam Makeba was a jazz singer from South Africa who also worked closely with Nelson Mandela and made great strides in the work there and in the United States. At one point, she was married to a Black Panther. Opal Tometi and Alicia Garza are the co-founders of the Black Lives Matter movement. Fred Hampton was the deputy of the Black Panther movement. He established free lunch programs for his entire community, including other ethnicities and races. He was assassinated at the age of 21, and he was on the top of the FBI most wanted list for many years because of his work with different ethnicities and races and getting them together. James Baldwin, who is my favorite author. And DeRay McKesson, he is a activist. He is a protester. He's a social media influencer, and he used to be an education administrator, and he works very, very hard to bring awareness to anti-Black racism in schools. So who am I? Well, that's a very old picture, but I like it. I'm not going to sit here and rattle off credentials or anything like that. I want you to know who I am as a person. First and foremost, I'm Teneshia. I'm just me. I think in the last session, someone said I just want to be. And so that's just who I am. But I'm also a Black woman who's been studying this topic informally, I think, since I was 5 years old. I've always been interested in why groups had different acceptance socially. Probably up until my late teens, I honestly believed that the world operated on only Black and white, that if you were not Black, you were white. That's part of my socialization and my indoctrination, but also I only saw myself as excluded from everybody else as a Black woman and a Black little girl. It was like there was me and my family that was Black, and then there was everybody else. I've been engaged in liberatory thought as long as I can remember. I just haven't been able to name it, probably until the last 10 or 15 years. And it wasn't until I moved overseas that I started to understand a lot of the systems and how they work and are intricate. I'm a mother of two. That was part of my introduction, and they are my reason for this. As James Baldwin says, you can take everything from us, but you can't have our children. I'm also an educator. And finally, I like to think that I'm a place to rest for people who are doing this work. I like to think that people can come to me at all entry points of this very difficult work, and I'll offer them refuge. I heard the other day that someone said, your purpose is not what you do, but it's how what you do affects other people. And I hope that you know that this presentation is intended to help and liberate and trouble and get you thinking about some of the topics that I'm going to talk about. Oppression, racism, and discrimination serve no one. They may benefit some of us, but they serve none of us. Okay, so this session is what I will call a 101 level course on anti-Blackness. This is a complicated, nuanced depth of thinking that I'm not going to get into, mostly in the interest of time, not that I don't want to. So this is going to be some surface level stuff. I encourage you to reach out to me if you want resources or more information. But for this, it's going to just kind of like, we're going to touch on this idea of anti-Blackness in education. What I'm going to talk about may feel very incongruent with your thinking about DEI, and that's okay. I think at the beginning we talked about how there's no closure and to sit a little bit in being uncomfortable. Also, anti-Blackness is not just for Black people, and that really needs to be highlighted for me, that often anti-Blackness is not for Black people at all, to be quite honest. I hope this is interactive. I'm going to ask a couple of questions or pause, and if at any point that I say something you want to jump in, please do. I really like for us to have a discussion on some of the things that I'm going to present today. So before we even get started, we have to norm this definition of anti-Blackness. It seems, honestly, self-explanatory, but maybe it is, maybe it's not. Put your thoughts in the chat. When I say anti-Blackness, what comes to mind? What doesn't come to mind? What do you think it is? And I actually can't see the chat, so, oh wait, here I can. No, I cannot. Okay, put that in the chat if you would not mind.
Tanisha, we can read it off for you if you'd like. Liz says, belief / assumption that Black is inferior to white. I said, believing that white is right and superior. Kelly said, I really am not sure. Hate, ? Matthew says, a negative perception towards people of color. Lucas mentions dark skin is somehow bad, inferior. Elsie saying hating your own Blackness / darkness of skin. Lauren, fear of Blackness, ignorance of diversity of the Black community, forced assimilation to white culture / norm / appearance. Nayang says a form of oppression.
Okay. I will venture to say all of the above and then some. Let's see here.
And Zorika just mentioned, because of white supremacy and either or thinking, Black is the most different from white, therefore has a special place in racism. Thank you, everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I made a little word cloud that I think captures what everybody said in some way. And there's some things that aren't included. Definitely colorism came up, or Black not being right, and so on and so forth. So this is kind of what anti-Blackness is, but I want to highlight on this word cloud that it's also transnational, it's post-slavery, and it's global. It's intersectional, and it affects everyone who is part of the African diaspora. So here's the sort of official definition in scholarship. And I put this picture, we all know who this sweet little girl is, as she's in the United States entering into a desegregated school, but it's not because so much of her, it's because of what you see in the background. This absolute hate for a child that's going to school. And that sort of captures what anti-Blackness embodies. Anti-Black racism is specific kind of racial prejudice. It's directed towards Black people. It is very targeted. It's systematic and it's structural, and it's more than individual prejudice. It systematically marginalizes Black people and communities and devalues them in all contexts. So anti-Black racism, although it is sort of like self-explanatory, we all have a general understanding of it, it is grounded in theoretical underpinnings. And I'm not going to bore you to death with what they are per se, but I think you might be interested in sort of where this idea comes from. First and foremost, it comes from this idea called Afro-pessimism. From the author Frank, I'm so bad with authors' names, Frank Wilkerson. He came up with the idea that said Black people are not considered human in any stretch of the imagination, that it's a social death to be Black. And that's a little heavy-handed, and it's hard to accept that, no, you are a person. We do treat Black people as other people, but as a general understanding, Black people are not considered in the way that humans organize socially, that they are an outlier. Next, from building from that, is this idea of Black crit. Some of you may or may not be familiar with critical race theory. It's all the rage right now. Black crit is a very specific understanding of how Blackness and critical race theory come together. Now, why I put that one in particular is because it's very interesting to our arena of international schools. Black crit talks about Blackness being endemic worldwide. It's the first US theory that kind of steps outside of its own context. It also troubles between being Black and multicultural thinking, which I know that we all have, we've seen this in the mission statements. Multicultural, we have 115 cultures. And Black crit says multiculturalism really is in tension with Black people. And I'll explain to you what that means later. And so that was really appealing to me in terms of thinking about how it shows up in international schools. And then this idea of Afrofuturism. If you were at the conference and you heard Dr. Stephanie Tolliver speak, she definitely leans into Afrofuturism. And Afrofuturism is this idea that not only is there anti-Blackness, but there's this sort of creative liberatory outlet, that we imagine a world, we're hopeful of a world where Black people are not outside of the fringe of humanity. And it's kind of that leaning into this idea of Afrofuturism that gives us the fuel and the drive to do this work. This is one of my favorite quotes. Nobody's free until we are all free. I want to stop right here and maybe do a little discussion if you guys are willing or into it. What do you think this means, that nobody's free until we're all free? You can do a little hand, you can unmic, put it in the chat.
Matthew's saying we are all interconnected.
Okay.
My freedom relies on yours.
I think it also has to do with the sort of attitude that as long as you're sort of dehumanizing people, you're dehumanizing yourself. So that's the notion that you can't have these kind of attitudes towards people without dehumanizing yourself. Yeah, I guess that's what I'd say.
Okay, a sentiment, I agree with all those sentiments, particularly that when you dehumanize someone else, you dehumanize yourself. Also, in terms of our context in international schools, that as we do DEI work or anti-racist work, that if we are not capturing everyone, then we are capturing no one in our work. There is no partial DEI work. It is a zero-sum game. We'll talk about that in a bit. Let's see here. Okay, so leading into that, why does anti-Blackness deserve a targeted approach to DEI? Why do we lean into that, into anti-Blackness specifically? And I'm going to say because DEI at this point, from what I've seen and what I've read, it's a broad strokes approach. It's additive. It's not disruptive. It's not dismantling. And by embracing oftentimes non-Black bodies is often justified as anti-racism work because it's inclusive of more than white. And so by doing that, there's this kind of understanding that we're doing DEI, we're doing diversity, and Black people are included, and that's great. Of course that they are, but without taking a targeted approach, it doesn't quite get us where we want to be in this space. Unfortunately, DEI work kind of acts as this cloak of the interconnectedness of anti-Blackness and all other forms of oppression. It kind of goes, hey, we're capturing everybody. And so it negates where some of these ideas of oppression came from. White knowledge systems in particular position racism generally. They kind of see anti-Blackness specifically and racism as a general rule is sort of this glitch in the human system. This kind of like, oh, we're sorry about that. Let's go ahead and bring you back into the fold. And it makes it very ahistorical. It doesn't address economic, social, political, the gamut of intersectional stuff that we are all aware of. When Black suffering is not acknowledged as a global phenomenon, none of the other oppressions can be acknowledged as well, not in a way that's very meaningful. So consider this. DEI is sort of this, we'll call it a blanket approach. And all of these people on the margins are sort of shivering out in the cold. And so we throw a blanket. Some people, the blanket affects them more. They're a little bit warmer than others. Some people may have a little bit of blanket on them, but they're still a little bit out in the cold. When you tend to anti-Blackness, the blanket is not necessary. Everyone is invited inside where it's warm. It is the beginning of the work for all other racial and ethnic oppressions. I truly believe that. So by saying that, sort of that analogy, when we say things like BIPOC or POC, it reinforces incorrectly that racial and ethnic groups have similar lived experiences, and we generalize them into one category. That is very hard to capture thinking about my blanket approach as a metaphor and also literally. Even in the acronym, you have BI and then POC, Black, Indigenous, People of Color. Anti-Blackness, Black people, and Indigenous people have a very particular place in racism and in these international schools that need to be tended to. Refusal to engage in the structure of anti-Blackness, it undermines everyone's experiences. It also engages us in what we call oppression Olympics. And I think that some of you may have heard that term. It's who is being oppressed more. And it starts to have this sort of bigotry between groups as to who is it that is more, who is suffering more. You see it oftentimes with students in schools. You see it between, affinity groups and who gets a place and who doesn't. And we eliminate all of that when you capture this idea of anti-Blackness. I'm going to stop right there because I know that sometimes when I talk about centering anti-Blackness, it seems very siloed. It seems very narrow. And again, as the 101 course, just thinking about the idea of starting with anti-Blackness, how does that resonate with anyone in the group? You can take your mic off if you want to. Does it seem equitable? Or does it seem like we're missing a piece? Oh.
So what I like about it is I feel like it draws you to the source of the issue. So it feels more systemic and it feels more focused on the actual issue. What I'm having a hard time grappling with is, to the extent that other groups also feel depressed, but maybe or maybe don't identify with Blackness as the source of their oppression. How I get your metaphor of the blanket sort of smoothing everything over, but I do wonder if this would lead to more oppression Olympics, as you said, in the sense of who's included in anti-Blackness and who is not. But again, what I do like about it is it seems more to get to the root cause. That was my reaction. So I was sort of on both sides.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anyone else?
Thank you for sharing that, Liz. For me, when I hear Dr. Taylor talk about centering anti-Blackness, I don't know if you've ever seen this meme where there is this, it's in a school, and there's this person who's cleaning off the stairs. It's snowing, and the person's cleaning off the stairs, and you have a kid who's in a wheelchair. And the kid in the wheelchair says, "Can you clean up the ramp?" And the person cleaning up the snow saying, "Well, let me just get to the stairs and then I'll get to the ramp." And the kid in the wheelchair says, "But if you clean the ramp off, we can all go up. But if you only clean the stairs, I can't. I'm left behind." And that's what it reminds me of when you said centering anti-Blackness. That's a way to give access to everybody. Because like, I think it was Christina who mentioned, and I'm going to read what she said, which was, white supremacy doesn't understand community. It doesn't understand anything other than individualism. And I think that metaphor of cleaning up the stairs when you can clean up the ramp for everybody to have access kind of reminded me of that.
Yeah. I like that. That sounds familiar, but that kind of works. Anybody else have any thoughts on that? So I'll offer you this. There is no economic, political, or social discussion globally that does not include the oppression of Black people. There is no iPhone without the oppression of Black people. There is no food scarcity without the oppression of Black people. There is no political mayhem that does not begin with what they call the afterlife of slavery. And that's something that's, it's actually class 201. So it's a little bit deeper, but as a global phenomenon, there is no corner of the earth of which people from the Black diaspora are not somehow in the discussion of oppression. And there is not another group per se, which I would offer potentially Indigenous, that can say that at that scale. Now, the next level with kind of like tensioning with other groups and their oppression is things like colorism, things like hierarchy, things like, competition within groups, all still stems from this idea of the Black being the object and everyone else kind of being a subject, and social stratification. Who is on top? Who climbs to the top? And we see this in international schools because, as we've said before, in whiteness is sort of the goal. It's sort of this kind of white normativity with English language, with the way that we do pedagogy, instructional curriculum, and the list goes on. And so if whiteness is the goal, what is its an anti-goal? What is it that you don't want to be? If everyone is striving for global North Western normativity, what is it that you do the opposite of that? And that's how it kind of comes into the discussion of DEI, in so much as if I'm striving for this as normative, then I absolutely don't want to be its opposite. And if we can kind of grapple with that, and you have to sit with it for a long time. And I'm not even saying that it is holistic and it's 100% applicable, but I am saying it gets us closer to dismantling the system. We get a little bit closer when we can sit with something like, I'm working towards whiteness, therefore I do not want anything to do with Blackness. So how do we engage educators and school leaders? Before I talk about those in specific ways, I want you, if you can see this picture right here, it says passenger from Africa countries and South American countries, and these little arrows. When I went to the ALOC conference a few weeks ago, this was the sign that I saw in Thailand in the airport. So this was 14 days, 20 days ago. And if you were from a country in Africa or South America, you had to be ushered into this little space, fill out some forms, and you had to do a mandatory 10-day quarantine for a list of diseases that are mostly eradicated in developing countries. Some of which are actually in the United States as is going through and people aren't being vaccinated, but they are still allowed to proceed. And as your students and you and all of us travel around the world, these signs are everywhere. There's an undercurrent understanding that if you are from Africa in any material way, that you are excluded. This is a sign in an airport. It's a big sign. And the man actually told me I was not allowed to take a picture of it. The guard. And I was like, I mean, it's up there. Why can't I take a picture of it? And he wanted to confiscate my phone. Now, where does this kind of, what we were talking before about, we have tensions. What I was able to do was show my nationality. And this is where social stratification starts to work. But it started with me being a Black person taking a picture as an anti-Black, and then my nationality came into play. That's a conversation for class 301. But in looking at this, as engaging education leaders and school leaders, we need to be aware of how the countries we are in depict Black people in their pop culture, in their media, in their airports. We need to recognize and research this. Here where I am in Jordan, there are no anti-Black discrimination laws. You can be turned away from a store simply because of your skin color, period. There are Black Jordanians here who were enslaved. That is a history that is never taught in school. There were enslaved Africans here that are now generational African Jordanians. And they experience a level of discrimination that is comparable to Jim Crow era in the United States. You need to engage school leaders by meeting with them and stakeholders and educating them on the foundational work of anti-Blackness, whether or not you have Black community members in your school. This is not a Black issue, because you most likely have them in your communities on some level. And so the students in your school are very aware when they leave school how those people are being depicted and treated. You need to solicit what we call counter stories, things that go against the normative, stereotypical inferiority, deviancy, et cetera, from Black global community members, not just Americans, from global community members. Get those stories, whether those people are in your community or not, and put them forth to leaders and say, this is what this looks like on a global scale. And this is why we need to address it. I'm going to pause here and say, I believe in international schools wholeheartedly. I think that the richness of so many nationalities in one place, sort of organically, is the best place to do this work. These children are going to go out and be the leaders. And if we can get them to understand this politically, environmentally, socially, when they go out and get their high-paying jobs and they sit on the UN and they sit on these committees and they say, hey, let's start with what anti-Blackness is doing globally. How much further will human rights proceed? Also, I want to emphasize this work is not for Black people. Black people are very well aware of anti-Black sentiment. It is a daily occurrence. In as much as me going through the airport and I had to see the sign, my children would have had to see the sign. Other children going through school would have to see the sign. And non-Black students see the sign and stereotypes are reinforced. Okay, addressing anti-Blackness in policy. 3 areas: child protection, curriculum, recruitment and evaluation. I have some recommendations. Child protection. Name anti-Blackness as a very specific type of trauma and assault. We name sexual assault, we name abuse, we name all kinds of things. Name it. Anti-Blackness is its own specific type of trauma and assault, and treat it as such. Treat it as you would a child who is sexually assaulted. It is at that level of egregiousness. Use country-specific wording and behaviors to depict anti-Blackness in your policy. Do not rely on Western wording or what you think it looks like from a Western point of view. It is very nuanced in every country. Do a little due diligence. What does it look like where you are? How does it present itself? What words are used? When I was in Nepal, the word would be equivalent to the N-word in the United States was hapsi. And they called this little boy this as his nickname, and he had no idea, nor did the administration. I'm not placing blame, but without a little due diligence on what it looks like in country specific, these things can blow right by you. So be very specific in your child protection to know what it is you're looking for when this trauma and assault shows up. Create policy that protects Black students from consequences when engaging in self-defense. It is common sense to us that if you're protecting yourself or those you love, that at least in the United States, the law is on your side, period. There is no place that if you're protecting yourself that you are held accountable. That wording needs to be in your policy, that if a child is called the N-word or is constantly harassed for weeks and weeks on end, and they begin to defend themselves, that they are not held to a consequence also. Recognize the negative effects anti-Blackness has on its community members. This presents itself as sometimes sullen, depression, anxiety, oftentimes even anger outbursts that seem out of place, suicidal ideation, internalized depression, and racism. These things all come to play, and we need our counselors and the people that work on child protection to recognize these as not, bad behavior, particularly in a student, that a student's acting out. Maybe take a deeper dive and ask them questions when you ask what's happening to you at home or what's happening to you in school, or are you being bullied? Ask another question. Are you experiencing anti-Black racism? Are you experiencing racism? And if the child doesn't know what it looks like, because often they don't, because we don't teach what it looks like, dig a little deeper. Well, is someone consistently touching your hair without your permission? Is someone trying to touch your skin or pointing at you or calling you names? Someone calling you Oreo or what have you? And this doesn't just apply to non-Black students. Black students do this to each other. We are all part of this system. Set up affirming Black affirming spaces and hold them sacred. Here in my environment, the pushback is that if we do it for you, we have to do it for everyone else. And the answer to that is hold them sacred. One of the best ways to mitigate the effects of anti-Black racism in any context is to have a space that is safe, that is positively racialized, where the children can just be, and they are engaged with people who will protect that space. It sends a message of them being loved and cared for. And in those spaces, be affirming. It's not just, oh, you have your group because you're being oppressed. It's you have a group so that we're going to talk about all the beautiful ways that Blackness shows up in the world. And maybe those children then can invite others in, but they need to be a safe, protected space, and leaders need to hold those places sacred. Hold perpetrators accountable as well as educate them. This goes for adults and children. They need to be held accountable in a way that is clear and specific and written in policy. If a teacher-to-teacher incident occurs with a microaggression or a macroaggression or just straight up overt racism, there needs to be an accountability other than an apology or that was not my intent. There needs to be something that is written in policy. If this happens, here's the consequence. And then we also go to restoration, to education, to repair, but there needs to be some type of accountability written in policy. This also goes for children. Ignorance to the fact is not a reason to not be held accountable. I think in 2024, we can all agree to say, well, they didn't know that Black people, they've never seen Black people, they know their hair felt like. I think we all agree that that needs to be unacceptable as a global phenomenon. The world's too small. Next is curriculum. Use what's called a critical education to map curriculum. This is from Apple, Michael Apple, 2009. If you want to look it up, I'll also send the resources, just shoot me an email. Bear witness to negativity. This is in your curriculum. There is a lot of horrible things that happen and it needs to bear witness. Not as a way to feel guilt, not as a way to put pressure on an in-group or an out-group, but you need to bear witness to it. Point to historical, social, economic realities and contradictions to white normativity. I always find it interesting in biology classes or genealogy classes, I'm not a scientist, but I've never been told why people's skin colors are different. And there is a very real reason that there is melanin in your skin based off of where you are on the globe. What if children were taught that specifically? Point to a contradiction in those classes as to why this happened. Contradiction in the curriculum. Do not throw out elite knowledge, but make it non-hegemonic. Do not throw out, say, well, that's not the way we do it. It's the Western side of things. Don't do that, but say there are other ways. There are a myriad of ways that we can talk about this topic on equal footing. When you and your curriculum instructors get together, let's talk about different ways we can pull in information. And this isn't just literacy based. We don't just have Black authors. We don't just have, a section in the library. We're talking about holistic thinking. And this takes work and research. It's hard to find some of these things, but it's worth it for all students. Be cautious of broad stereotypes and monolith thinking about groups. When I say Black people, I do not mean just me, just on the continent, just in Brazil, just in Haiti. They are not our experiences are not the same. And that goes for any other ethnic or racial group. There are many, 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 many different variations to the experiences and based on economics, global, sitting, age, gender, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So be cautious to have broad stereotypes in your curriculum. Be an activist, not just an ally. All of these things are fine, but when you see, as they say, when you see something, say something. Be active. Actively look for information that contradicts what you've been taught as an educator in your teacher education programs. With the internet now, there is no reason to not have information about other groups. Finally, recruitment and evaluation. Include evidence of anti-racism, not of anti-racism, but of adhering to it in interview questions when selecting candidates. Put them in your interview questions before they even get in the door. How would you address this DEI issue? Give them a case study or a scenario. What would you do in this case? Ask direct questions. How do you feel about Black people in this space? Or do you think that Black people are at this school? Something super benign. How many Black kids do you think go to this school? And if someone says none, why would they? Because I'm in Germany. Those are red flags. Those aren't reasons not to hire someone, but you can do some more digging. How do you feel about curriculum? Put the questions in the interview before the people are hired. Require an anti-racist component to evaluations. This is board members, leaders, teachers. I would even go so far as say students graduating, but that might be a step too far at this point. How are you addressing anti-Black racism as a component of DEI in your work? Put it in the evaluations. You will be evaluated on this. This is something we're looking at in terms of whether or not you're a fit at our organization. Train educators to use Black affirming language inside and outside of class. These are things like, I'll use my son, Grayson, he's always looking at TikTok videos of Black kids dancing. That's not affirming, even if that's what he's doing, right? Say, oh my gosh, he has such an interest in this particular person. Who is it from? Where do they come? Why do you have an interest in it? When talking about enslaved people, use the word enslaved and not the word slavery. Those are just some very small examples. I'm sure there's many, many more, but Black affirming language is good for everyone. Do continual work on how anti-Blackness is addressed in hiring and retention. Constantly reevaluate how you are addressing it in your hiring and your retention efforts. If someone from the Black community or another person of color is leaving your establishment, do a very targeted exit interview and find out why. And not just, I wasn't treated well. Ask questions that lean into race and anti-Black racism. Were you treated this way? Do you believe it's because of your race? That is the end of my presentation. I would love to have some discussion and thoughts on what you heard.
Thank you so much, Dr. Taylor. That was brilliant. Christina, would you mind if Dr. Taylor stops sharing her screen? Would you mind sharing your screen?
Yes.
We're thinking about maybe, and Dr. Taylor, let us know what you think, about having people maybe go into breakout rooms to kind of have a quick discussion on everything that you've shared. I don't know if you had a question in mind or if it's just kind of
No, I love it. Yeah. I don't know how to do a breakout room. You know that, Rama.
We'll help you. We're here for you.
Okay.
Wow. Everything Dr. Taylor shared was so powerful. So we're going to put everybody in breakout rooms for the next 10 minutes or so, and then we can come back together and then share out. How does that sound for everybody? Yeah? Excellent. Okay, Nayan, can you help with the breakout room?
Yes. Could we pause the recording, please?
Yes.
We hope it was helpful to get together and kind of debrief on what Dr. Taylor was sharing with us. Anybody would like to share a takeaway or something that really stood out for them? We'd love to hear your thoughts.
I didn't get to say this in my room, but I just really appreciated specifically Dr. Taylor when you were saying about teaching like what racism looks like and having those stories and making it really concrete, like standardized basically, because so much of it isn't talked about or taught, or if it is, it's like maybe in high school and only a little bit and only certain ways. And a lot of times like microaggressions, like in our previous session today with Juan, like kind of death by 1,000 cuts, and how it does build up and it makes you angry and it makes you mad and you don't have a way to like do something about it. So yeah, I just appreciated thinking about teaching that and including it in the recruiting process too, like giving people case studies about how they teach these things or how they would approach an incident. So thank you.
Well, I just want to say thank you. Oh, no, go ahead. Go.
That, like, I really appreciated the explicit ways that we can embed it into our institutions, because often we're constantly being asked, you know, so what does it look like? How can you do it? And it's, you know, these are the ways you could do it, and it's a beginning. There's a lot more that needs to be done, and like, you know, yeah. So I really appreciated that. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. I know it's like a little bit past time, so I want to thank everyone for attending my first community visioning session, listening to my thoughts and my research, and just being with me. I'm so grateful for all of you here. This was everything to me, so thank you for everything.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Let's give some virtual love to Dr. Taylor. Naomi, I love how you do this and then your camera just has hearts coming out.
I don't know how to do
So
that
cool.
either. I don't know.
That's like high level technology that I don't
Right.
understand. Thank you so much, Dr. Taylor, for everything. Christina, would you mind putting the slides back so that we can end our community visioning? Let's make sure we give some virtual love to Dr. Taylor. I think she left her email address in the chat. She's an incredible resource. And as Nayong mentioned earlier, she's also a beautiful refuge for all of us. This is what's happening in February at ALOC. Please make sure you check out the link tree and sign up. We have tons of things going on this month and even more things going on in March when we turn 7 on March 14th. Wow, ALOC turned 7. Look, what a journey we've been through. So please make sure you check out the link tree. Hopefully one of the team members can drop that in the chat. Christina, would you like to talk about the book club?
Yeah, sure. If you have already attended the past 2 book club sessions discussing Lily Zhang's DEI Deconstructed book, it was in collaboration with International School Services, so thank you very much. And the really exciting part is now in our next session on March 14th, Lily Zhang will actually be at the session, so you can ask them your questions and discuss with them.
Liz is here. Hi, Liz. Thank you.
And the task force, Angeline, since you're here, would you mind talking a little bit about the task force? Sorry to put you on the spot. We'd love to hear from you.
Hi, sorry, my son's making noises in the background, so you'll have to. Oh, he's listening to a German audiobook. But yeah, the task force. I am co-facilitating a group about humanizing pedagogy, and quite a few people in this room are in that group with me, and I'm very appreciative of all the work that we're able to do together. I can't speak for the whole task force, just what we're trying to put forth in this group. But ALOC is one of the co-founders, and I guess the radical dream with the task force is that we're able to provide guidance for international schools the same way in which the Child Protection Task Force has been able to make a difference in the international school space. Some guidance and that everyone should kind of take on board. I know that Nunana near me with a few other people are working with Kevin, are working on the accreditation bodies and have had successful meetings with many of the accreditation bodies and are trying to move that piece forward. And there is an accrediting body that accredits the accreditors, and they recently published a statement about how they're going to enhance this area. So there is some movement in there. Yeah, it's a work in progress, and if anyone's interested in supporting the Humanizing Pedagogy group, let us know.
Thank you, Angeline. There's a lot of great work being done. Nayon, would you like to talk about this quote from the Nat Ministry?
I hope we all know the Nat Ministry by now. I think you've heard restless resistance. Exhaustion will not create liberation. I don't know what else to add to that. Just, we hope you're working on self-care, community care. Thank you for being in community with us. Thank you for being in solidarity with us. We're so grateful for you. Thank you, Rama.
Thank you, Yabo. Thank you, Christina and Nayon. Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Thank you, everybody. That's it for us. We'll see you next month.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Can you turn
Bye,
off the
Matthew.
recording?
It's nice to see you.